Good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Capitalist Cast. Today, I am joined by Lowman Henry, who is a man who wears many hats. He is both the chairman. How many titles do you have at this point?
More than I can count. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm the chairman and CEO of the Lincoln Institute, which is a public policy group based here in Pittsburgh. But I also wear a hat as chairman of the board of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association and have some sort of an affiliation with CAP. Never quite sure what it is.
Yeah, it always becomes kind of a mystery when we try and untangle all of those things. On a serious note, there's a lot going on. Coming up in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a judicial election. There's congressional redistricting. There's the state house and Senate redistricting. There's a lot happening. There's going to be a gubernatorial race next year, a Senate race next year. So let's start with the one that's, I guess, the closest in time, which will be the judicial elections. I guess, first of all, why should people care? And second of all, what parts of the judiciary are up for election?
Well, folks should care because what we've seen, particularly out of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court over the last 7 or 8 years, is that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which, by the way, is controlled by Democrats, and yes, partisan affiliation does matter when it comes to the courts, despite the fact judges and justices try to position themselves as nonpartisan. They really aren't. So let's do away with that fallacy to begin with. We have a 5-2 Democrat majority on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they have used that majority in an activist fashion. First of all, they, a couple of years ago, completely threw out our congressional district maps. They hired a professor from a left-wing college in California. Actually, I think all colleges in California are left-wing, maybe one. And that left-wing college professor redrew all of our congressional district lines and gerrymandered it to favor Democrats, which in fact is what occurred. During the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, time after time, as Republicans in the state legislature tried to reel in the excesses of Governor Wolf and his administration as they put out lockdowns and business restrictions and all sorts of curbs on our freedom, it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that repeatedly sided with Governor Wolf to take our freedoms and liberties away. Ultimately, we, the people, had the final say in May when we passed 2 constitutional amendments, but we shouldn't have had to go to that extreme. In any event, we have a seat open on the Supreme Court. This is not an opportunity for Republicans to gain ground because the seat that's open is held by a Republican, Justice Saylor from Cumberland County, who is retiring. So Republicans need to win this seat just to stay where we are. Yet it will be 2023 and particularly 2025 when we'll have an opportunity to make progress. So you have that seat open on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We have Kevin Brobson, who is currently the president judge of the Commonwealth Court, who is the Republican nominee for that position, and Maria McLaughlin, who is a judge on the Superior Court, also running for it on the Democrat side. So we have a one-on-one race there. And by the way, the judiciary in Pennsylvania is structured with, as you might imagine, the Supreme Court at the top. Then the next level of appellate courts are Commonwealth and Superior. Superior Court is where appeals from the county common pleas courts go for civil and criminal matters. Commonwealth Court is where, if there's a dispute involving a government agency, that's where that case goes. So you have Supreme, Superior, and Commonwealth, county courts of common pleas, and then at the very local level, magisterial district judges. We also have a seat open on the Commonwealth Court, and in that race, Megan Sullivan, we have 2 seats open on the Commonwealth Court. And in that race, Drew Compton and Stacey Wallace are the Republican nominees. Drew Compton is currently serving as a judge. He was appointed to fill a vacancy by Governor Wolf, even though he's a Republican, more or less, and was confirmed by the Senate. So he's now running for a full term. Stacey Wallace, an attorney from the northern tier of Pennsylvania, wonderfully experienced woman in the law. They're the 2 Republican nominees. And then, of course, there are two Democrats, Lori Dumas and David Lee Spurgeon. So 2 seats open there, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And then on the Superior Court, Megan Sutton, who has been an assistant attorney general, a Republican from Chester County, is the Republican nominee. And Tamika Lane, who is a common police court judge in Philadelphia, is the Democrat nominee. So, Leo, we have 4 appellate court seats up, 1 Supreme, 2 Superior, 1 Supreme, 1 Superior, 2 Commonwealth. These are very important. And folks need to understand, Leo, that these judges and justices make decisions, and they are every bit as important as who we elect as governor or who we elect to represent us in the state house and state senate. This election, under 2 weeks away now, just 2 weeks away, actually, very, very important. And this tends to be a low turnout year. So we are urging people to take these races seriously because they have had a dramatic impact on our lives. And we're going to talk a little later about redistricting. Usually redistricting ends up in front of the Supreme Court in one way or another.
Yeah. And we saw, so during the last Supreme Court election cycle, or maybe it was 2 ago, we saw a lot of money come in from outside groups, particularly organized labor and the Trial Lawyers Association, who always spend big money. There's kind of an interesting dynamic as it relates to organized labor in that one of the current Supreme Court justices is the brother of a union boss in Philadelphia, Johnny Doherty, who is now on trial facing federal charges as it relates to some activity down in Philadelphia with the
City Council.
Yeah. So do we see, or has there been kind of that influx of outside money so far? Or has it been, kind of fairly quiet at this point?
It has been relatively quiet. We will find out later this week. Campaign expense reports are due by Friday. So by Friday, we ought to know how much money is coming in. And you are correct. In 2015, organized labor essentially bought 3 seats on the Supreme Court. The Republican Party was asleep at the switch. Millions of dollars in labor money poured into Pennsylvania. They bought 3 seats, including one, Justice Wecht, who actually campaigned on congressional district map and redistricting. And first of all, Leo, that's a violation of judicial ethics because the judges are not allowed to campaign on cases that might be before them. Apparently, ethics didn't matter. He campaigned on it. He got into office. He did it. The legislature should have impeached him and the other 2 justices who participated in that charade. Of course, the Republicans in charge of the state house and senate at the time lacked the spine to do that, so they got away with it. So here we are.
Yeah, and we saw that play out. The result of that lack of fortitude, I guess to put it politely, by the leadership in the House and Senate really played itself out as things progressed into the pandemic. I mean, of course, they couldn't have foreseen that. But looking at what happened with the redistricting, there was just those types of, that should have been a major red flag that something needed to be done. And it's unfortunate that the House and the Senate didn't take action at that time. If I recall, now Senator Chris Dush, who's been on the show before when he was a member of the House, actually introduced the impeachment resolution in the House, but it got 0 traction. Nobody wanted to do anything with it.
And that was the mistake. It was another case of where the legislature had its powers emasculated by another branch of government. And effectively, the legislature has become the least effective branch of state government. Tom Wolf, as we all know, has governed as a dictator through the whole COVID-19 pandemic. The Supreme Court is activist, overruling and really writing law. The legislature, and there are new leaders now from when all this occurred. The current crop of leaders need to really get tough, Leo, and start clawing back some of their authority because it is the legislature where we, the people, have the most impact, because we have the Senate and House districts that are small compared to a statewide race. And we have an opportunity at the grassroots level to really be effective.
Yeah, and the most recent opportunity that they had, the clearest use of their authority really has to do with the budgeting process. And we saw in the last budget, they did nothing to try and use that leverage in a way that would institute policies that the people wanted instituted. They ended up having a fairly massive increase. I mean, outside of the money that came from the federal level, a very large spending increase in state level funding that will create problems, going forward.
And you're right. They through the budgeting process, they could have sent a message to the Supreme Court simply by slashing its budget. And that meant a message that they're not going to tolerate this. That, of course, like impeachment, was not done. Now, there has been some effort. Russ Diamond, a state rep from Lebanon County, has introduced a proposed constitutional amendment, which did pass one session. Constitutional amendments have to go through 2 consecutive sessions of the General Assembly and then go on the ballot. He is trying to get passage through this session that would actually take these statewide appellate court races and break them into districts. This is something that really needs to be done, because not a lot of money overall, relatively speaking, goes into these statewide races. They're low profile. Unfortunately, people don't know even the names, let alone anything about the appellate court candidates they're voting on. So a lot of external factors like party affiliation, geography come into play. As a result, 90% of these judges and justices come from either Allegheny County in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, leaving the rest of the state very much underrepresented and tilting the ideological balance of the court all courts very far to the left. So if we were to go to a by-district system, as we do with our House and Senate members, then we would all have equal representation on the courts. And of course, judges and justices will say, oh, well, we don't represent. We're non-political. Well, as I said at the outset, they very much are. So if we could get Russ Diamond's constitutional amendment on the ballot and get it passed, that would then increase the effectiveness of grassroots campaigning and allow judges and justices to become more well-known in their district, and therefore we'd have a more informed electorate. This is a reform that we're trying to get through, but so far we haven't been able to get it through the second session of the legislature.
Yeah, and it's worth noting there was also a comment on the comment thread here about the Taxpayer Protection Act. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about these major pieces of reform, and really any piece of legislation coming up for a vote, it's important to recognize who controls the legislative calendar. And at this point, since the House and the Senate are dominated by Republicans, it is Republicans in the House. It's Representative Carrie Benninghoff from Centre mm-hmm. County, and in the Senate, it is Senator Kim Ward from Westmoreland County. So the issues like constitutional amendments that do not require the governor's signature, these are things that the legislature can very easily bring up for a vote. It's just a matter of having the majority leaders, again, Representative Benninghoff and Senator Ward, respectively, put the legislation on the calendar and get the members to actually vote on it. A complaint, or one of the things that we deal with frequently, is, the issue of, we're not sure if it's going to pass. And that's fine. If it's not going to pass, it's not going to pass. Put it up for a vote so we know who we need to get rid of. Yeah. It's not a complicated, this isn't complicated, and unfortunately it's just, we haven't seen that. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. I want to circle back. You brought up the issue of districting with the, having the courts go over to a district system. That brings up the fact that we have our supposed to be every 10-year redistricting process. underway right now. So that'll be all of the congressional districts, as well as all of the state house and state senate districts. Let's talk a little bit about the congressional one, because that's the processes are different between the two. So let's talk about congressional first and just kind of go from there.
Well, congressional redistricting, Leo, takes the form of a bill that has to pass the legislature and be signed by the governor. And of course, there have been efforts by left-wing groups such as so-called Fair Districts Pennsylvania, which I refer to as Democrat Districts Pennsylvania, that have been out there screaming about gerrymandering, and we want to have a citizens commission, as if you're going to find an unbiased citizens commission anywhere. That you'll find the Easter Bunny first. So we're still under the same process where the congressional redistricting will take the form of a bill that has to be passed in the same form by both chambers of the legislature and signed by Governor Wolf. This is the first time in about 50 or 60 years, Leo, where we haven't had unified state government, where we have a legislature and governor of differing parties. So it's going to be interesting, first of all, to see if they're going to be able to come to an agreement on it, or whether they simply can't agree and it gets kicked back to our friends at the Supreme Court, using the term friends loosely, and we get another map drawn by some left-wing college professor. Right now, we're going to lose one seat in Pennsylvania because of the reapportionment. And reapportionment is where we get the census results. And by the way, everything is months behind schedule because of COVID. It took longer for the Census Bureau to get the numbers out. But Pennsylvania's population grew at a slower rate than other states. As a result, we lose one congressional district. So first of all, you have to redraw the map in order to eliminate that congressional district, and then also redraw the map to take into consideration population growth trends that have changed around the state, and they have been significant. Interestingly, we have had two members of Congress who will be leaving. Both are from the Pittsburgh area. Congressman Mike Doyle yesterday announced his retirement. He represents the city of Pittsburgh and many communities in Allegheny County. Congressman Connor Lamb, who has a suburban Pittsburgh district, also a Democrat, is running for the United States Senate. So two Democrats from Western Pennsylvania are leaving office, and Western Pennsylvania has had a slower population growth than Southeastern Pennsylvania and South Central Pennsylvania. So were logic to be involved, which of course it won't, you would see those two districts combined. And in fact, to the degree that the districts change throughout Western Pennsylvania, they're going to have to get larger geographically. So it will be interesting to see how this map is drawn. And of course, the big battles will be over the Lehigh Valley, which is an area that tends to be a swing area. Congressman Cartwright up in northeastern Pennsylvania, he's a Democrat in an area that's been trending more and more Republican. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with his district. A lot to be decided here. And it all needs to be done, Leo, by early February at the latest, because the process of the primary begins in mid-February, where candidates have to circulate petitions to get on the ballot. So we're going to need to know what the districts are by then. So the legislation has to work its way through the process. Hopefully there's some sort of agreement, and or then whatever court challenges have to be adjudicated before we get to the middle of February.
Yeah, so the federal ones, as you mentioned, are done through this, basically through the legislative process.
Right.
The state house and state senate seats are very different in terms of how
very different.
Go ahead.
There's a legislative redistricting commission to do House and Senate seats. That commission is comprised of the Republican and Democrat leaders of both the House and Senate. So you have two senators, one R, one D, two House members, one R, one D. And then the fifth member is a supposedly independent member. In this case, a former dean of the University of Pittsburgh Law School, who actually wasn't really a bad choice for that, to the degree that you would have an impartial person appointed by the governor who had to make that appointment, probably about the best we could hope for. So now that 5-member commission is tasked with redrawing the state Senate and state House district lines. And we'll see where that process goes. Ultimately, that commission will have to vote on it. That's even more difficult than congressional districts because, as you know, Leo, there are 203 state house districts. Right. So you're now trying to make every one of those districts as even as possible in population, which is the goal of this. And you have the shifts in population. So we saw movement eastward because Western Pennsylvania lost population relative to the rest of the state. And then you have counties like Lancaster County and Cumberland County in central Pennsylvania that are among the fastest growing population-wise. So we might actually see the movement of a congressional district or two into south central Pennsylvania as we go through this. But this is tough to get those because both the Republicans and Democrats on that commission are going to be fighting for the advantage. And the Democrats would have you believe the reason why they're in a minority in the state legislature is because Republicans gerrymandered the district lines to keep them from winning seats, which absolutely is not true. It passed it passed court muster and all those sorts of things. Democrats are in a minority because they haven't been able to come up with candidates who are ideologically or individually candidates that voters wanted to vote for. They've had bad candidates and bad ideas. And also the Democrats tend to be very highly concentrated in small areas. Right. Particularly city of Philadelphia, city of Pittsburgh. So you'll have districts where there's 80 or 85% Democrat because they're all clustered together. And it's really that factor that prevents Democrats from having more competitive districts.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you take a look, as you mentioned, where the population shifts have been over the course of the last 10 years, because of the way that the population has grown or not grown in particular areas, we're really going to see there's going to have to be some consolidation of some districts and some other districts moved around. When you take a look at the current state house and state senate districts, I mean, as you mentioned, there is, a fairly significant shift that's going to happen. And at the federal level, with the two congressmen leaving, that's going to make that process a little bit easier because one of the things, unfortunately, that plays a large part in the redistricting process is who's retiring. Yes. Which incumbents need to be protected is kind of one of the approaches that happens, rather than looking at things on a rational basis and making sure that the lines actually make sense.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, but at the state level, so far, we really haven't seen a lot of announcements from either state house or state senate members that they would be retiring or not seeking re-election next year. So if we have the opportunity to, or, as, some of those retirements start coming out, that may give us some, or some of those announcements happen, that may give us some indication as to which districts are going to be carved up in order to make the populations work in other places.
And again, all of this has to be done at the latest by early to mid-February. You may recall 10 years ago when we went through this process, they were not able to get the process done by the time we had time to circulate petitions to get on the ballot. And there were court challenges that threw things back and forth. So we actually ended up running the 2012 election on the old district lines one more time because they just didn't get it done. Hopefully this time around, the Legislative Redistricting Commission and the legislature and the governor on the congressional level will be able to get the job done in a timely manner. Hopefully there's at least some amount of agreement so that we minimize court action, because everybody would like to next year actually run the election on its normal calendar.
Right.
We had disruption in 2020 because of the COVID pandemic and the primary delayed and all those sorts of things. So this is another case of where I think a lot of folks would like to get back to a sense of normalcy about it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Unfortunately, at this point, it seems like normalcy is as many things going wrong as possible. So I'm kind
Yeah.
of curious if that is the trend that is going to continue, or we're going to actually see something that looks more like the way it's written down on paper, essentially.
Well, and for candidates or potential candidates, how do you decide if you're going to run for a state house or state senate seat if you don't know what the district is? Because you may not know what district you're going to be in. And
Right.
there's a big difference between becoming a candidate in, say, an open seat than having to run against an incumbent, particularly if it's one of your own party. So candidates are sort of frozen in place here because they don't know what's going to happen. Now, it's very rare, as you know, for incumbents to be redistricted out of their district. But for potential candidates, that's not part of the equation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, and I certainly do not envy anyone who is looking at running for office at this point. We have at CAP, we've been working on actually setting up our first candidate training academy for next year, and trying to take into account some of these calendar shifts and everything has made planning for that incredibly difficult. So we've managed to cover a lot of the items that I had wanted to. Let's quickly just we have a few minutes left. Let's quickly just the gubernatorial and senatorial race for 2022. I mean, it's essentially for the Senate and on the Republican side for the gubernatorial, there are a lot of people who have thrown their hat in the ring. We just had in the gubernatorial side of things, Josh Shapiro, our attorney general, who has been, essentially running for governor for 2 years. When you look at the number of press releases he's put out, officially announced that he was running for governor. What are we looking at in terms of those races at this point? Is it still really too early to tell what direction that's going to go in?
I think it's still too early to tell. As you referenced, Josh Shapiro has actually been running for governor for about 20 years. He's a career politician. I think he came out of the womb with a campaign sticker on for governor. He's the only candidate on the Democrat side. He's very successfully managed to block everybody else out of the race. We'll see if anybody else emerges. On the Republican side, completely different story, Leo. There are up to 15 candidates or potential candidates. It's a free-for-all. And right now, the only candidate with any appreciable name identification is Lou Barletta, who was the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate back in 2018. And none of the other candidates have statewide name ID. So if you look at polling, Lou comes out on top because he's the only one that has been around the horn. That, of course, is going to all change as everybody starts advertising and we move forward. I sort of divide that race into 3 tiers. Candidates who have the potential to become front runners, candidates who are decent people who might run a decent campaign but not likely, and then there's the lower tier of candidates who are, okay, you're just doing this for vanity purposes, or you've got to be kidding.
You're right.
Me. Just in there, though, I'd put 4 or 5 people. So there's going to be quite a competition here. The process will start to winnow down in January. Of course, the state parties will meet for endorsement. If the parties endorse, that winnows the field because some people won't run against the endorsement. We don't know yet whether or not the Republican Party is going to endorse. That'll be decided in late January or early February. So that whole winnowing process has to occur. Also, candidates have to get signatures in 10 different counties to get on the ballot. I think some of them don't understand the logistical difficulty of doing that. So some may not be able to get past that hurdle. In any event, Republicans are going to take a long time to sort this out, probably right up through the primary in May. On the U.S. Senate side, we have highly competitive races on both sides of the aisle. You have Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who ultra left-wing, radical, progressive, quote, quote, our lieutenant governor, who only really his only real accomplishment is to push for legalization of recreational marijuana. But he's raised millions of dollars from left-wing activists around the country. He's running against Connor Lamb, the congressman from Pittsburgh we talked about earlier. Connor Lamb positions himself as a centrist, which he is not, but he positions himself that way. So the two of them, and Valerie R. Cush, who is Montgomery County Board of Commissioners, also in that race. Interesting, you have Fetterman and Lamb from Western Pennsylvania and R. Cush from the Southeast. That might actually make her a front runner down the road just from geography and population. Then on the Republican side, you have Jeff Bartos, who was the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor here a couple of years back. And he is running in a race with a former Trump administration ambassador to Denmark, Carla Sands, and then also a candidate out of Pittsburgh. And Leo, I'm blanking on name at the moment. Well, in any event, do you recall the gentleman's? It's terrible that I would just have a momentary lapse in that. Actually, ran against Connor Lamb for Congress last year, narrowly. Sean Parnell, excuse me,
Sean
that's who I'm
Parnell.
thinking of. So Sean Parnell, probably at this point, somewhat of a front runner because he's been endorsed by former President Trump, which is a big plus in a Republican primary, maybe a negative in a general election. We'll have to see. So Sean is somewhat of a front runner, but he and Bartos are really going after each other already. Carla Sands has enormous personal wealth, already plunked $3 million of her own dollars into the race. So that's going to make her a factor. Both of those races are going to be highly competitive, Leo. And again, we'll probably take to the primary to sort it out. Both, of course, are open seats because Pat Toomey, the current U.S. Senator, is retiring, not seeking re-election. And Governor Tom Wolf, praise the Lord, is term limited and cannot run for a third term. So he's gone. So with two open seats, a lot of candidates.
Yeah, it is certainly going to be interesting to watch how the field winnows down. And to get in an early plug for it, I'm sure many of the nominees will be at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference next year, trying to convince people that they are the best candidate for either the gubernatorial or senatorial seat.
I'm trying to figure out how to get all the gubernatorial candidates on the stage at one time at this point. By the way, since you mentioned the leadership conference, quick plug, check out our Facebook leadership conference tomorrow. We're announcing our featured dinner speaker for the 2022 conference, which is April 1st and 2nd. And we're going to be announcing the featured dinner speaker tomorrow and opening registration. So your timing is perfect, Leo.
Excellent. That is fantastic to hear. I'm looking forward to see who the featured speakers will be. It's always a fantastic event. I do appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat with us this morning about just the whole cornucopia of activity that's happening in Harrisburg, both in terms of legislation, redistricting, just everything. So it's going to be an interesting couple of months between now and the end of the year. And again, thanks, Lowman, for coming on today. If people want to find out more about the Lincoln Institute, what is the website?
LincolnInstitute.org.
Easy enough.
Easy enough.
Again, thanks, Lowman. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. We will see you again soon.